Graham Keller didn't expect to find a half-frozen woman collapsed in a snowbank on his way home from a late night shift, especially not one wearing heels that cost more than his truck. Hey, are you okay?" he called out, already yanking his parka off as he trudged through knee-deep snow. The wind howled off the side of the mountain road, stinging his cheeks red. His boots crunched as he knelt beside her, her long dark hair tangled and her lips pale. She blinked at him, dazed. My car, it slid," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Yeah, I see it, it's in a ditch." "You're lucky I came down this way," he said, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Come on, we gotta get you warm." He didn't ask questions. Not about the sleek black car half buried in snow or the way she looked like she belonged at a gala, not stranded in rural Idaho. He just lifted her into his arms, careful but fast, and carried her to his old pickup. The woman didn't protest. She shivered against him, clinging to his chest like it was the only solid thing in the world. His cabin wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a fireplace that always needed prodding, and a kitchen from the 90s, but it was warm and safe. He settled her on the couch, wrapped her in a thick wool blanket, and started a fire. "Do you have anyone I can call?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. Her cheeks had started to pink up again, eyes finally focusing. Deep brown eyes, sharp, alert, but exhausted. She shook her head. "No, I mean, not right now." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "You're lucky I was late picking up my kid, or you'd be an icicle right now." Her eyes darted to the hallway. "Your kid?" As if on cue, little feet padded down the hallway. A sleepy voice called, "Daddy." Graham stood and scooped up the small figure. "Hey, Ava, go back to bed, sweetheart." Someone just needed help. Ava peeked over his shoulder at the woman. "She's pretty," the 5-year-old whispered. The woman gave a soft, surprised smile. "Thank you," Graham chuckled. "Come on, Munchkin." He kissed Ava's forehead and carried her back down the hall, tucking her in. When he returned, the woman was sitting up straighter, the blanket pulled tight around her. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the trouble and for scaring your daughter." "You didn't scare her," he said, walking to the kitchen. "You hungry?" She hesitated. Yeah, actually," he nodded. "Grilled cheese or canned soup?" She blinked. "Grilled cheese sounds perfect." He worked quietly, flipping the sandwiches on a worn pan. "You got a name?" he asked over his shoulder. She bit her lip. Brinley Rhodes, Graham," he said. "And the sleepy one is Ava." Brinley smiled. "She's beautiful." He shrugged modestly. "She's a handful." After they ate and he made sure she was warm and okay, he gave her the guest room. Brinley hesitated in the doorway. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He scratched the back of his neck. It's what anyone decent would have done. But she knew better. Most people didn't stop for strangers in a snowstorm. Most people didn't invite them into their homes, especially not people with a kid. The next morning, Graham stood at the stove flipping pancakes while Ava colored at the table. Brinley stepped into the kitchen, now in one of his flannel shirts and a pair of borrowed leggings. "Good morning," she said softly. Ava looked up. "You look nice." Graham looked over his shoulder and tried not to stare. "You do," he said before he could stop himself. Brinley flushed. "Thanks. I hope you don't mind my dress from last night was not made for surviving snowbanks." They all laughed and it felt oddly easy. "You got someone to call today?" Graham asked, sliding pancakes onto a plate. Brinley's smile faltered. "I'll figure it out," she said, sitting beside Ava. "But maybe, could I stay a little while longer, just until the road's clear?" Graham hesitated. "You sure you trust me that much?" "I think if you were gonna axe murder me, you'd have done it already," he laughed. "Fair enough." Brinley ended up staying 2 nights, then 3. The storm had knocked out power across the county, and her fancy car was still stuck in the ditch. She offered to pay for repairs. Graham waved her off. "You're my guest. You don't owe me anything." But he couldn't help noticing the way she got along with Ava, reading her bedtime stories, braiding her hair, laughing with her over silly pancake shapes. And Brinley noticed things about him, too. How he worked double shifts at the mechanic's shop in town. How he always put Ava first. How his hands were rough, but his touch was gentle when he tucked Ava in at night. On the 4th night, Brinley stood beside him on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. "You're a good dad," she said quietly. He looked out at the stars. "I try, it's just me and her." Her mom left when Ava was 2. Brinley's jaw tightened. She's lucky to have you. He glanced sideways at her. What about you? You never said where you're from. She hesitated. New York. I run a family business. Must be big if you were driving a car like that. Something flickered across her face. Yeah, it's big. He didn't press. But something about her didn't add up. She wasn't just some woman from out of town. Everything from the way she carried herself to the way she spoke, it screamed money. Class. Something far from his world. Still, he didn't care. She was kind, funny, warm. And when she laughed, it made him feel like he wasn't drowning for once. That Friday night, Ava was asleep and Brinley helped him dry dishes. I should probably head back tomorrow, she said softly. My assistant's probably having a meltdown. He turned, facing her. You're kind of a mystery, Brinley Rhodes, she smiled. You're not so simple yourself, Graham Keller. He stepped closer, dish towel forgotten. You ever gonna tell me who you really are? Her eyes didn't leave his. Would it change how you see me? He paused. I don't know, but I'd still want to see you. Silence stretched between them. Then she whispered, I don't want to leave. He leaned in. Then don't. And just like that, she kissed him. It wasn't careful, it wasn't safe, but it felt like something real. The kind of kiss that made you forget the rest of the world. When they pulled apart, breathless, Brinley whispered, You have no idea what you're getting into. He smiled. Neither do you. Brinley didn't sleep. Not because the bed wasn't comfortable, it was. Not because of the cold, the fire Graham built had kept the cabin warm enough. But because of the way he'd looked at her after they kissed. Like she wasn't the executive director of a billion-dollar empire. Like she wasn't the woman who'd been on the cover of 3 business magazines last year. Like she was just Brinley. A woman who could fall in love with a man who made pancakes from scratch and never asked for anything in return. She stared at the ceiling until dawn, her pulse still racing from the way his hands had brushed her hips, steady but hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to want her. By the time the sunlight filtered through the curtains, she'd made a decision. She found Graham in the backyard with Ava, who was bundled in a snowsuit and laughing as he pulled her on a makeshift sled made from an old laundry basket and a rope. Graham's hair was damp with sweat, his breath forming clouds in the morning air. I was wondering if you two had run off to join the circus, Brinley said, stepping onto the porch. Graham turned, squinting against the sun. You're up late for someone who went to bed early. I had a lot on my mind. Ava waved from the basket. We're sledding. Daddy said I'm winning, Brinley chuckled. Winning what? The snow race, Ava declared proudly. Brinley stepped off the porch and walked to them, her boots leaving crisp prints in the snow. Can I try? Ava gasped. You want to race Daddy? Graham raised a brow. You sure those borrowed boots can handle it? I've survived worse. They took turns pulling Ava around the yard until they were all breathless and flushed. When they finally collapsed on the porch steps with mugs of cocoa, Graham didn't say anything. He just handed her a blanket and let her lean against his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. Brinley waited until Ava went inside to warm up before speaking. I need to go back today. Graham didn't look surprised. Figured you might. I've been avoiding it, the calls. The meetings, the board. He turned slightly. You're not just the owner of some business, are you? She watched her breath curl in the cold air. My family owns Rhodes Holdings. We're in commercial real estate, tech investments, private aviation. I'm the CEO. Graham let out a low breath. That's a lot. I didn't want you to treat me differently. I wouldn't have, he paused, but I might have asked you to cover dinner. Brinley laughed, but it caught in her throat. I didn't expect any of this. You, Ava, the way this place feels like, she stopped. Like what? Like somewhere I want to be. He looked away. Then why leave? I have responsibilities, people depending on me. A press conference in 2 days and a quarterly report I haven't finished because I've been here pretending I'm someone else. You weren't pretending. She looked down at her mug. No, I wasn't. They went inside quietly. Brinley packed her things while Graham cleared snow off her car and checked the tires. He didn't say much, but she felt the weight of every unsaid word between them. As she zipped her overnight bag, Ava came in with a crayon drawing. It's me and you and Daddy, she said, holding it up. Brinley knelt, her throat tightening. That's beautiful, sweetheart. You can keep it, so you don't forget us. Brinley hugged her tightly. I won't ever forget you. Graham stood by the door, keys in hand. I'll drive behind you. Make sure you get out of town without ending up in another ditch, she nodded, heart pounding. Thank you. The drive to the highway was quiet. The snow had started to melt, revealing patches of gravel and the edges of the road. When they reached the main junction, Brinley pulled over. Graham pulled up beside her and got out. She stepped from her car, wind tossing her hair as they faced each other beside the two vehicles. This feels like the part where we say goodbye, she said. It doesn't have to be. You know where I'm from, what I do. My world is 1,000 miles from this one. Then give me a reason to come find you in it, she faltered. I don't want to mess this up. You won't. He stepped forward, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I'm not going to pretend this didn't mean something. Brinley reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. She opened it, removed a card, and handed it to him. No assistants, no receptionists. That number rings straight to me. He looked at it, then at her. I'll call. I hope you do. He didn't kiss her this time. He just let his fingers brush hers, slow and warm, before stepping back. Brinley got into her car and drove away, the road straight and clear ahead of her. But her heart stayed tangled in the snow-covered cabin behind her, with a man who fixed engines and raised a little girl with more love than she'd ever seen in a boardroom. The invitation came 3 days after Brinley returned to Manhattan. It was hand-delivered by a courier in a charcoal suit who stood stiffly in the glass lobby of Rhodes Tower and asked for her by name. The envelope was thick, lined with navy silk, and sealed with the emblem of the Archer Foundation, one of the most exclusive fundraising galas in the country. Brinley turned it over slowly as she stood in her office, the city's skyline stretching behind her like a steel and glass fortress. Her assistant hovered nearby, trying to read her expression without asking questions. Cancel the board prep for Friday night, Brinley said, slipping the invitation onto her desk. I'll be attending this instead. The assistant blinked. But you haven't gone to a public event since I know, Brinley said, already pulling her phone from her pocket. Tell wardrobe I need something that doesn't scream CEO of everything, and tell Thomas I'll need the town car but no driver. I'll handle this one myself. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. That night, she called a number she hadn't dialed before but had memorized since the moment it was placed in her hand. She let it ring twice, then hung up. The silence on the other end was louder than anything she'd heard in days. By the time Friday arrived, the city was drenched in moonlight. The gala was held in a private hall on the Upper East Side, its marble steps glowing under fairy lights. Brinley stepped from the town car in a deep sapphire gown that swept elegantly behind her, her hair twisted into something that looked far more carefree than it was. She moved through the crowd with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and she had. But tonight, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and her mind kept drifting away from the French champagne and the clink of diamonds. Miss Rhodes, a familiar voice called from behind her as she passed a table covered in orchids. You're here, finally. Brinley turned to face Julian Archer, the heir to one of the oldest fortunes in the state. He looked exactly as she remembered, tailored, polite, and utterly dull. I said I'd come, she replied. Yes, but I didn't think you'd escape your tower long enough to be seen in public. I must say you're causing quite the stir. She raised her glass. Then I've done my job, Julian leaned in slightly. There are rumors, you know. That you disappeared for nearly a week with no explanation. That you weren't alone. Let people talk, Brinley said evenly. They usually do, he tilted his head. I suppose it doesn't matter as long as you remember where you belong. Something in her expression shifted. Where I belong, among people like us, Julian said smoothly. Not wherever you ran off to. Before Brinley could respond, her eyes caught movement at the far side of the room. A man had just walked through the grand double doors, dressed in a black suit that didn't quite fit the room but somehow made everyone else look overdressed. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet determination. Graham. He looked nothing like the man who'd pulled her from a snowbank. And yet, he was unmistakably him, broad-shouldered, steady, and completely out of place among the glittering elite. Her heart slammed against her ribs as he spotted her. Julian followed her gaze and frowned. Who is that? Brinley didn't answer. She was already moving, She crossed the room in long strides, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. But when she reached him, all she could say was, "You came." Graham looked at her for a long moment, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket like he wasn't sure what to do with them. "You called." "I figured that meant something. I didn't expect you to walk into this world for me. I didn't come for your world," he said quietly. "I came for you." She tried to swallow the lump rising in her throat. "This place. It's not like what you're used to." "I noticed," he said, glancing past the sea of diamonds and tuxedos. "Someone offered me a $12 water on the way in." Brinley laughed through the tightness in her chest. "You don't have to stay." "I didn't fly across the country just to leave," her eyes widened. "You flew. Guy at my shop owed me a favor. I traded him 2 weekends of overtime for a standby ticket." He paused. "Ava's with a neighbor." "I wouldn't have come otherwise." Brinley reached for his hand, curling her fingers around his. "You didn't have to do all that." "I did," he said. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day you drove off." She stepped closer. "I haven't been able to breathe without thinking about you." A cough interrupted them. Julian stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Brinley," he said slowly. "Would you mind introducing me?" Brinley turned, her spine straight. "Julian, this is Graham Keller, the man who saved my life." Graham extended a hand. "Nice to meet you." Julian hesitated, then shook it. "Likewise." He looked at Brinley. "Your taste surprises me." "It surprises me too," she said with a smile that dared him to say more. Julian gave a curt nod and disappeared into the crowd. Brinley let out a slow breath. "Well, that was a moment." Graham leaned in. "You sure you want to be seen with someone who doesn't know which fork to use?" She squeezed his hand. "I've spent years surrounded by people who know all the right forks. None of them ever made me feel like you do." They stood there for a beat, the music swelling around them. Then Graham pulled her gently toward the dance floor. "I don't know how to dance in places like this," he said. "Neither do I," she whispered. "Let's make it up as we go." And so, beneath the chandeliers and the watchful eyes of New York's elite, Brinley and Graham swayed together, unbothered by the whispers, untouched by the gold-plated world around them. For the first time in her life, Brinley didn't feel like she was performing. She just felt home. Graham had never seen the inside of a place like this. He stepped into the soaring marble atrium of Rhodes Holdings the next morning, his boots echoing against the polished floor that gleamed like water. The receptionist didn't blink when she saw him, only pressed a button and said, "Mr. Keller is expected." Executive floor, top level. He hadn't planned on showing up at her office. After the gala, they'd walked the streets for hours, Brinley barefoot with her heels in hand, laughing like she hadn't in years. They'd talked about everything but where they stood. There hadn't been space for it. But when he woke up that morning in a hotel room overlooking the Hudson, he knew he couldn't go back to Idaho without saying what needed to be said. The elevator opened into a glass-walled floor that looked more like an art museum than a workplace. And there she was, standing at the far end of the room in a suit the color of storm clouds, looking out over the city like she owned it. Because she did. Brinley turned the moment he stepped in. "You came," she said, setting a folder down. "I said I would," Graham replied, stepping closer. "But I didn't come to just look at the view." Her eyes searched his. "You didn't call. You didn't ask me to." She walked to him slowly, every step precise. "You don't belong in this world, not because you're not good enough, but because it doesn't deserve someone like you." He shook his head. "You don't get to make that decision for me," Brinley faltered. "I've built my life around control, around knowing what's coming, but with you, I never know what I'm going to feel next. You ever think that might be a good thing?" He took her hand. "You said you didn't want to leave the cabin. Then you did. I didn't stop you, but I'm not letting you walk away again without knowing where we stand." Her voice was quiet. "I'm afraid of what I'll become if I let go of everything I've built." He stepped even closer. "You won't lose anything. You'll just make room for something more." She looked down, her fingers tightening around his. "Do you know the last time I did something just because I wanted to? Not because it was strategic or expected?" "No," he said, "but I hope it was when you kissed me." Brinley smiled faintly. "It was." They stood in silence for a moment, the city roaring below them, the world suspended between decisions. Then she spoke. I want to come with you, Graham blinked. To Idaho, for a while, not forever, I want to know what it's like to wake up and not check a dozen emails before I even brush my teeth. I want to take Ava to school. I want to help fix that truck you keep cursing under your breath. You trade all this? He asked, glancing around the penthouse office. Not trade, just press pause. For once, I want to choose something with no board behind me, he nodded slowly. You'd need someone to cover for you. I already called my COO this morning. His eyebrows lifted. You made this decision before I walked in, didn't you? I hoped I would. Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and folded. Ava made this for you before I left, said it was for your office. Brinley unfolded the drawing carefully. It was a crayon sketch of 3 figures standing under a crooked sun. A tiny house sat beside them with a chimney and a puff of smoke. She said you needed something to remind you of the important stuff, he added. Brinley's hands trembled slightly as she looked at it. She's wiser than most CEOs I know. She gets it from her dad. Brinley looked up. So what now? Now, Graham said, you pack a bag and come see what it feels like to breathe real air, to sit on a porch and watch the sky turn pink. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get another snowstorm. I don't think I'll ever be that lucky again, she whispered. He leaned in, his voice rough. You already were, you just didn't know it. The next 48 hours moved in a blur. Brinley handed off her schedule to her COO, packed a suitcase with jeans and sweaters she hadn't worn in years, and booked a flight for the following morning. Graham stayed in the city, but not in a hotel this time. He stayed at her apartment, sleeping on the couch while Ava's drawing hung on her fridge. On the flight back, she sat beside him in a hoodie and no makeup, her hair twisted into a braid. No one recognized her, and for once she didn't care. They held hands the entire flight, heads leaning against one another. When they landed, the wind had picked up again, and snow flurries danced across the tarmac. Graham's neighbor met them at the truck with Ava bundled in a coat 3 sizes too big, her cheeks pink from excitement. Brinley, Ava shouted, running up the moment she spotted her. Brinley bent down, arms open. Hey, sweetheart. Ava launched into her, knocking the breath out of her lungs. You really came. I told you I wouldn't forget. Graham watched them silently, a strange ache blooming behind his ribs. That night, they sat by the fire again. This time, Brinley wore one of his flannels, and Ava curled up between them with a book. The storm outside wasn't dangerous, just soft and steady, wrapping the cabin in white. I never thought I'd end up here, Brinley said quietly after Ava had gone to bed. Not like this. Neither did I, Graham replied. She reached for his hand. But I'm glad I did. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked to the old desk in the corner. He pulled open a drawer and took out a small square box. Brinley stared. Graham. It's not what you think. He opened it to reveal a thin silver chain with a tiny snowflake charm. I saw it in town the week after you left. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again, but I bought it anyway. She took it carefully. It's beautiful. I wanted you to have something to remember this place, just in case. Brinley looked up, eyes shining. I'm not going anywhere. He stepped forward and helped her clasp it around her neck. Then it's a promise. That no matter what happens next, you'll always have a home here. She wrapped her arms around him, resting her head against his chest. And you'll always have a place in mine. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the storm had passed. Brinley opened the door to the wooden shed behind the cabin and blinked at the rows of half-finished projects inside. A stripped engine block on a workbench, a rusted old bike missing pedals, even what looked like a handmade wooden sled, only half varnished. I didn't realize you were building a museum of almosts, she teased, stepping inside. Graham looked up from where he was tightening bolts on an old snowblower. That's generous, he said, brushing his hands on a rag. I call it a graveyard of I'll get to it eventually. How many of these things have you actually finished? 2, he said, grinning. The fence and the treehouse. Ava stopped letting me promise anything else after last year's seesaw incident. Brinley leaned against the work table. I want to help. With the seesaw, with the unfinished. I've spent too much time finishing things that didn't matter. I want to build something with you. He studied her for a beat. You're serious? I bought boots for a reason. She looked around. What's that? That, he said, pointing to a dusty frame in the corner, was supposed to be a chicken coop, until Ava decided chickens were too pecky. Brinley crossed her arms. Then maybe it should be a greenhouse. He tilted his head. You know anything about greenhouses? No, she said, smiling. But we can learn. They did. Over the next few days, they measured and cut and argued over whether the windows should open sideways or slide. Brinley was shockingly good with a drill. Graham discovered she talked to plants while watering them like they were board members with potential. Ava helped too. Painting the outside of the coop turned greenhouse in broad, colorful streaks. She insisted on adding a sign at the top. Brinley's garden, but Daddy pays for the dirt. One afternoon, as the snow began to melt into the edges of spring, Brinley stood in front of the mirror with Ava perched on the bathroom counter beside her. Why do you wear that necklace every day? Ava asked, tapping the tiny snowflake charm at Brinley's throat. Brinley smiled softly. Because someone gave it to me as a promise. Like a wedding ring, Brinley blinked. Not quite, but kind of. Ava leaned closer. Are you gonna marry my dad? Brinley met her eyes in the mirror. Do you want me to? Ava nodded. I already planned the wedding. You can wear a pink dress, but not the gross kind with ruffles, and Dad can wear a suit, but with boots. Brinley laughed. I'll take it under advisement. Later that night, Graham found her in the greenhouse, barefoot in the soil, arranging rows of seedlings she'd ordered online. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. You always this committed to lettuce? She glanced up. Only when it's symbolic. Of what? New things, things worth growing. He stepped into the greenhouse, the air warm and earthy. I've been thinking. Dangerous, she murmured. He ignored her. About what we're doing here. You, me, Ava. This whole life that kind of snuck up on us. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. If you're about to talk yourself out of it, I suggest you don't. I'm not. I'm doing the opposite. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, not velvet, not fancy. Just a plain pine case with a brass hinge. Brinley didn't move. I don't have a yacht, or a penthouse, or a private jet to rent for a proposal with fireworks over Paris, but I do have this land, this life, and I want it to be yours too. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a pale blue stone surrounded by tiny mountain peaks etched into the band. Brinley's lips parted. You made this. Took apart my old college ring, melted it down in town, the stones from a mining guy I know. I wanted it to be something you hadn't seen before. She blinked, tears gathering. It's perfect. So is that a yes? She nodded, then threw her arms around him. It's a forever yes. They kissed among the seedlings, with soil on their hands and laughter in their lungs. The wedding was held in the clearing behind the cabin, where the wildflowers had just begun to bloom. Ava walked down the aisle with a basket of pine cones instead of petals, dressed in a white sundress and cowgirl boots. Graham wore a navy vest, no tie, and the same boots he'd worn the night he found Brinley in the snow. Brinley wore a pale blush gown, simple, flowing, with no ruffles. Their vows weren't grand or rehearsed. They talked about choosing each other every day, about building something lasting. About laughter and storms, and not letting the fire die out just because life got cold. Afterward, they danced under a string of lights Graham had hung himself, powered by a generator that only flickered twice. Brinley's former assistant flew in from New York with a cake that somehow survived the flight, and the florist forgot half the arrangements, but no one noticed. They didn't need luxury, they had each other. Ava insisted on making a speech. She stood on a chair and declared, "This is the best day ever because now I have two people who love me so much and they also love each other, which is cool. Also, we're getting a puppy." Graham turned slowly to Brinley. "We're getting a what?" Brinley lifted a brow. "Guess we are now." They all laughed. Loud, messy, unpolished laughter, the kind that filled space like sunlight. That night, after the guests had gone and Ava was asleep with a cupcake still smudged on her cheek, Brinley sat on the porch swing beside Graham, wrapped in a quilt, her head on his shoulder. "Did you ever think," she whispered, "that a snowstorm would change your whole life? I didn't even think I'd make it home that night." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for staying." Above them, the stars blazed like scattered diamonds, and below, the world kept turning soft, quiet, and exactly where they were meant to be.